Hello, this is Basar. In this tutorial, we are going to see how the Spring is handling internationalization. Again, we have a code repository in GitHub. You can find it here, and we have two branches. The main is the initial phase, and the final is the final project we are completing in this tutorial. This project is basically built on top of one of my previous tutorial about Spring validation. If you are interested, you can just watch that one and see how we are introducing validation in Spring. Now in this tutorial, we are going to see how we can change the messages for different languages. Again, we will start by cloning this project, running git clone, and opening this folder with Visual Studio Code. Now let's go over the project structure. Let's check the POM.xml. Again, this is running Spring Boot version 2.3.4 and running Java version 11. Again, we have Spring Data JPA, and we have the validation dependency, and we have the web dependency, and we have the in-memory database H2. And we are also using DevTools for automatically restarting the application while we are developing it for new changes to be applied. And we have Lombok, and that's it. And let's check the packages. We have this user package, we have this user entity, and we have a couple of constraints on each of these fields, like each of these fields cannot be null, or there are size limitations, or email constraints, or we have our own custom constraint, this unique email constraint applied for this email field in this user entity. And we have this user controller. It is taking the user from request body and it is validating it, and then it is saving it to database via this user service save method. And we have error handling logic right here. We have the API error, which is our error model, and we are converting the validation error to the exception triggered for the validation cases. We are mapping that validation errors to this our custom error message. So that's how the project is, and let's run it. So the application is running now, and let's send the user post request. Here we have a user object right here. This is a valid request, and when we send a valid request, it is returning back 200 OK. And if we send an invalid request, like let's say the username is null, it is returning back this error message. It is saying this email is in use. This is our custom constraint. And this one, it is saying the username must not be null. So that's how it is working. And in this tutorial, we are going to change these messages for different languages. And by default, Spring is supporting internationalization. And we can use this functionality by setting the header of accept language. I'm changing the size here. This is the accept language, and we can set the value of the language codes like FR for French, sending the request. And here for the username, we see different message, but the email is still in English. We will get back to it, but for now we can confirm that the username is changing, or we can use like the German, and here the message is changing to this one. So by sending the accept language header with the language code we want, Spring is returning the message according to that language. Now let's find out where these messages are coming from. So we have a failure for this email case, and let's go back to our code and let's check our constraint right here. Here in this one, we have this message field, and it has this message, this email is in use. But if you go to this not null constraint or size constraint, for this message part, we have a value something like this. So this is not the message we are seeing. This is the key of the message. And this key is used by Spring when it is finding the corresponding translation. Now let's find out where this key has corresponding values. Here in this Java projects part, let me extend this part. We are here in our dependencies, and we have this Hibernate validator. In our project, we are using the Spring validation, and it is relying onto this library, Hibernate validator. And when we look at this package, we have these validation messages properties files, and one of them does not have any underscore and the language part, but the others has the language code appended with underscore to it. So this one is for, let's say, this is for the German, this is for English, this is for French, and we have a couple of more languages listed here. And the one without the language code is considered as default. And when we open this one, here we have the keys, and let's find the not null case right here. So this is the key we have seen here in the, let's find the not null once again. So this is the key, Java X validation constraints, not null message. And that message is right here in this file. And when we change the language, what we have done here, we have sent the request in German DE, and we got this message. And when we find the DE version of this file, and here we see the message is translated in this file. Now we have seen how the keys in the constraints are mapped to corresponding language messages. We can apply same logic in our project by adding our validation messages files under this resources folder. So let's do that. Let's add validation messages.properties. And we can override the messages for the not null case, for instance, with our custom messages. So let's do that. Let's copy this key and let's paste it here. And let's say our message is username cannot be null. So saving this one. And the application is restarted. Going back to Postman, and the language was DE. I'm unchecking this one, so it's going to be sending my default language, which is English. So sending the request, and here we see username cannot be null. Our custom message is appeared right here. By the way, email validation error is gone now, because when we do any changes in our code, our application is restarted, and since our application is using an in-memory database, the data is gone. Therefore, this is considered like a first time request for a user registration, and there is no user with this email. Therefore, we don't see the error. So we have managed to replace the message with the one we want, but we have to be careful when doing these things. If we go back to our code once again and check the user object, we have this not null constraint is used for all of these fields: email, password, and the username. So if we send a request like this one, having all of these fields null, then we would be receiving these validation errors, and all would be having the same message in it: username cannot be null. And from user point of view, this does not make any sense, because we are receiving an error for a password field saying the username cannot be null. So the message would be leading confusion on the user side. So when overriding the default constraints, we must be setting the values more generically. So what we should do here is, if we would like to go with the default constraint keys, then our message must be generic, like cannot be null. But if we would like to replace this message with something else totally specifically for the username scenario, then instead of going with the message key of the not null constraint, we can override that value with our custom message. And in this message, we can provide new key. Let's go with the same naming convention like this one. It is JavaX, the package name, and the constraint, and the message. And let's go with the same convention. In curly braces, our package, this one, and the constraint, and this is for username not null message. And then we can go to our validation messages properties and paste this key, and then we can say username cannot be null. So with this way, for this not null constraint specific to this one only, we are using for the username, we are setting different key for it. And corresponding message is taken from our validation messages properties. So let's save these changes and let's try with Postman again. So all of these fields are null, sending request, and here we are seeing the username cannot be null applied only to this username. The other fields are receiving the default not null constraint message. But there's a missing part with our implementation. So if we change our language to DE, we are receiving translated values for the password or email, but for username, we are only receiving this one. So what we should do is we will go back to our project. We will add a copy of this file. Let's say validation messages. And I'm going to add it for my language, TR, Turkish. And if we would be adding for different languages, we would be just following the same language codes, like the FR for French, DE for German. So in the Turkish version, I say this message is something like this one, and saving it. And the application is restarted, going back to Postman, changing language to TR, and here we are seeing the password is the default message with the translated to my language, and for the username I receive what I've added right here. So if I go with the default language, for me it is English, and I get the messages in English. So this is how we are adding our custom messages and corresponding translations to our project. Now let's go to our next case where the email is in use condition. So let's say we are posting a user1 and user1 at mail.com, and this is the password. Sending the request. So this is the first success request. The user is added to the database. Now sending the request once again. And here I receive this email is in use. And if I enable my language and send once again, nothing is changing, because in the unique email constraint, we have the message hard-coded right here. So what we can do here is we can just replace this one with a key in curly braces. Let's say com my package constraint and the constraint annotation name and the message. And I'm copying this key into my validation messages files. And let's say this email is in use. And for my language, so that is how we would be adding internationalization for our custom constraints. Testing it once more with Postman. So the language is Turkish, the user is valid, the database is empty, sending first request, the user is added to database, sending the second request, and here we are receiving this message back. And when I change the language, I receive the default one. For this project, I added only these two properties files. For instance, I don't have the DE version, French version, or Spanish version. What happens if I try with that one? So let's go with the FR. And here we see the same message, which is the default one from this file, the file which does not have any language code. So by default, it is returning back this translation version. So if you don't have any implementation for the different languages, the responses will contain the default versions of the texts. But when we have the correct translation files, we receive the expected message back. Now we have one more thing to do here. In the messages right here, we are having this message, and this message is coming from, let's find it here in the error advice. This message is part of this API error object, this message field, and we are getting it from this exception object, exception get message. So if you would want to replace that message with something translated to different languages, we can achieve that with similar approach. So let's change this message to a translatable value. For that one, we need to have a separate language resources. And by default, Spring is looking for files like this, messages.properties. And similar to these validation messages, we add different language versions by adding messages underscore the language code properties. So let's say we will have this validation message. Let's say this is the default language. Let's say our key is this one. And let's say the message is validation failed. And let's add the translation for the different languages. And this is for my language. Something like this. So we have files here, the messages and the messages underscore tr. Now we need to use this key in here in error advice to get the exact message and replace this one, the one we are receiving from the exception object, the message, with our own translated version. Spring is providing us a functionality called as message source. So this is for resolving the messages by the parameterization we are providing. So message source, this is coming with the Spring context, and we want to inject that one to this error advice with auto-wired, and we will get the translated string, let's say the message, by calling this message source get message function, and this is looking for 3 parameters. The first one is the key we are using, so this one. We want to get the message for this key, and the second one is the argument array, and we haven't do similar thing, but let's go back to the original validation messages like this one. For instance, in this size constraint, we have this min and max values. Size constraint applied to this one, this username part. Let's try that one. Let's say we send a username with just 1 letter, and here we are receiving this message having the variables added to the actual sentence. And if we go with the different languages, the values are fitted accordingly. So in case our message properties might have some variables in it, we can provide those variables in this args array. For now, this is going to be null. And the third parameter is the locale. So here, the locale. We can ask Spring to provide us the current locale within this function. And we can pass it to this getMessage function. So with this way, we would be getting this key value for this locale, and Spring will be automatically picking either the default one or the one having the language suffix, and it would be returning back the message we want. So either this one or this one. And then we can just use it here like this. Now let's save all these changes. Let's try with Postman again. So for now, we don't have any language enabled. Sending the request. So this is failing because automatic restart is not working properly. So killing the application and running once again. So the application is initialized, going back to Postman, sending the request, and here we are receiving the message, the validation failed. And if we change the language, send the request, and here we are receiving corresponding messages in the response. So that is how we are replacing the messages in our responses like this. For the validation cases, we have this validation messages, and for others, for anywhere we want, we can use this messages properties. So this is how we handle the internationalization in Spring. So we completed our implementation. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you for the next tutorials.